Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. The Broadband Bunch Zero Touch Learning Series is live. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Joe Coldabella. Today's session is entitled The Imperative of Public Broadband. The Broadband Bunch podcast and Zero Touch Learning Series is brought to you, as always, by your Zero Touch automation experts, ETI Software Solutions, along with Utopia Fiber, DXTEL, Calix, and ITK Solutions Group. Be sure to follow the Broadband Bunch on LinkedIn and Twitter. You can also access Broadband Bunch podcasts on Spotify, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts. A quick reminder before we introduce our guests today. The session is interactive. We encourage you to submit questions via the questions or the chat box. Our team will be checking throughout the event. This session is also being recorded and will be available to all attendees for future access. Please feel free to submit potential topics for future Zero Touch Learning Series sessions or suggest future panelists. Thanks in advance for your participation. Now I'm excited to introduce our distinguished host, Heather Burnett Gold. Heather is the CEO of HBG Strategies, a consultancy engaged in broadband education, targeted at enabling fiber broadband deployments in unserved communities. A 30-year-plus industry veteran, Heather most recently served as the president and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Prior to that, she was the SVP of External Affairs and Access Management for XO Communications. Heather, take it away.
Thanks, Joe, and welcome to everyone today. So I think the big question when you're discussing public broadband is your community getting the broadband it needs and wants? Or are you constantly being told by your incumbent or current service provider that your citizens don't really need more speed, or that they just can't make the investment case work in your area? Maybe it's time for a change. Time to recognize that broadband, like water, sewers, and traffic lights of yesterday, is the new essential service of today, particularly in light of the new demands of virtual work and healthcare brought on primarily by the pandemic, but the need for speed had been growing all along. Once you make that determination as a community, though, how do you implement it? I'm pleased today with our speakers who will offer a wide range of experiences and answers to the question on how to implement community-owned broadband. Angela Bennett is the General Manager of Kitsap Public Utility District as of February 1st. I was so excited after serving as the Telecommunications Director for 4 years. Kitsap is primarily a water utility that has expanded into providing fiber optics on an open access network to its community's anchor institutions and those customers who have been underserved by broadband. FX Flynn, Chair of the East Central Vermont Telecommunications District, and that's a long sentence, which does business as EC Fiber. He is also president of the Vermont Communications Union Districts Association, which is called VCUDA. And the district, the one that EC Fiber contracts out its design, build, and operating process to ValleyNet, a nonprofit ISP. The leadership of ValleyNet is instrumental in conceiving of the project, resulted in the creation of the district, which comprises 31 towns, of which 20 have been fully built and which serve over 7,000 customers. Ryan Mayle, the Assistant City Manager of Fort Dodge, City of Fort Dodge, who over the last 4 years has spearheaded the renovation projects in historic municipal buildings, led the implementation of a complete overhaul of the city's financial software, and championed efforts to bring community-built fiber to the home to Fort Dodge. Fort Dodge began its decision to build municipally owned fiber networks after a supermajority of citizens said, go for it. They're currently building now and expect to go live in 2023. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to take 3 to 5 minutes to expand on anything I may have missed about their networks or themselves in my intro. And FX, if you will lead us off, because you actually have slides.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to participate, and it's exciting to compare notes on what's happening out there. In our case, if we can go to the first slide, the reason we're Vermont's first communication district is that back in 2008, and can we go to the next slide, please? In 2008, 23 towns voted at town meeting to enter into a contract with each other. And it looked like we were going to be able to borrow $42 million in September of 2008 from Lehman Brothers. And then they went bankrupt 8 days before the closing. So we were out of luck. And by 2011, we had figured out that we could probably borrow enough money locally to prove that we could build fiber to the premises in rural Vermont. 2 years later, we had our first audited financials. We showed that we were generating a surplus. By 2015, the bond banks were quite clear that if we were a sewer district or a water district, they could sell our bonds next week. But they didn't know what the heck an interlocal contract of 23 towns in rural Vermont was. So we went to the state legislature. We got legislation passed allowing for the creation of what is formally called communications union districts, or CUDs, kind of a joke by the dairy farmer who headed up the Senate Finance Committee and came up with CUDs. That's Vermont for you. We were immediately converted to a CUD. We were able to access the municipal revenue bond market. And we repaid our startup investors. And now at this point, we've gone from 23 towns to 31 towns. We've got, well, actually, this is a year-old slide. It's at 1,500 miles and 7,000 customers and $64 million in debt. And we expect that by the end of this year, all but one town of the original 23 will be built out. That one town happens to be the town I live in, which was saved for last because it already had about 90% cable. Our mission was that first we went and we built out where people only had dial-up or DSL, and we saved the last 3 towns for last. So right now we're looking forward to seeing some money out of the ARPA legislation, and we've proven to be a model that's been adopted by 8 other regions in the state of Vermont. So right now there are 9 CUDs. Can I have the second slide, please? And so our model is that it costs about $36,000 a mile to build, which includes the capital investment necessary to get at least 6 customers per mile hooked up. I break out the costs there, and these costs include all of the overhead and so forth. We expect to get $100 a month on average revenue, and that turns out to be enough to operate the network and repay the municipal bonds. It would not be enough to generate sufficient profit or sufficient return on investment for a for-profit telecommunications entity to build. And that's how we're accomplishing the miracle of building in rural Vermont. Thank you.
That's great. Angela, you also are in some sort of district. So I know they're a little different.
That's right, Heather. Thank you for inviting me to come here. I am part of Kitsap Public Utility District, but I love the idea of a communication utility district and that focus and really talking about communications as a utility. One of the things that I love talking about what we've done is what we've done to serve Kitsap County and serve the residents here. We are, for those who don't know, we're on the West Coast. Kitsap County is the place that the ferries go to in movies when they're leaving Seattle. So that's where we are. So as you can imagine, with COVID, our growth numbers have been exponential in that so many people are leaving the city of Seattle and moving into the Kitsap area. So we have huge growth, but we also are considered somewhat rural. And we have many rural areas that didn't have access to broadband infrastructure. So in 2016, we actually began our broadband network, but this was only after operating a network for over 10 years. So we had built a fiber broadband backbone throughout Kitsap County to serve all the anchor institutions and still operate that. So it connects schools, libraries, government entities. We do have a couple Navy bases here as well that we provide service with. And because we had that service, because we had that infrastructure already there, we were able to build off of that and use that backbone and some of that middle mile infrastructure to really leapfrog a residential network in starting to reach rural communities. In 2015, we actually went out and did a survey and made sure that our community wanted us to do this, that there was a need and a desire for the PUD to provide that service. And so now we are operating, we have over 625 miles of fiber within Kitsap County and are serving just over 1,300 residences and continue to grow from there.
That's great. So last but not least, new kid on the block, huh, Ryan?
That's right.
So tell us about your journey in the city of Fort Dodge.
Well, Heather, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and it's amazing to hear all different stories, but really with the same goal in mind, getting people to fast, reliable broadband. I mean, that was the goal that Fort Dodge had. You know, for us, we're a town 25,000 in north central Iowa. We had the opportunity of having incumbent service providers that didn't want to progress. The city council, which had nothing to do with the incumbents, had heard enough complaints, moans, and crying about this isn't working for us, that they really tasked our city manager and myself with how to make it better. We looked at many avenues, partnerships, sole sourcing it out, recruiting anything we could. And when we did an RFP in Fort Dodge, what we found was we had a lot of people interested, a lot of businesses that wanted to partner with us. When you get that much feedback, you really have to take a step back and go, well, if all of these companies want to partner with us, you know, maybe we should consider doing it ourselves. Something new. The one word that came out over and over again from our council was control. You know, our incumbents at one time, they were good at what they did. Unfortunately, they sold, they switched hands, they moved a little bit further away from us, and they lost that customer service, that local connection that they once had. And I think that scare, that fear is what really drove us to go, you know what, that could happen again. Even if we love that president, we love that person that we partner with, that could happen again. So control, that word control kept coming up. And we said, what can we do for our citizens for decades to come? And it came down to, let's figure out how to do it, and let's run our own municipal telecom. That's easy said, not easily done, right? There's a lot of logistics that come after that decision. But what we found moving forward was it was the right decision. When you do in November of 2019, we did a public referendum, and 73% of them said, yeah, we think we should do that. At this point in our country and our lives, getting 73% of anyone to agree on something seems a little ridiculous. And that was pre-pandemic, when for us in Fort Dodge, the pandemic hit hard when everyone with their occupational, their educational, and their recreational things got pushed back home. And really that service that they was getting by failed. We had stories from our local superintendent that kids were huddling around doors and windows of schools with their one-on-one device just to grab internet so they could do their work. Companies that had pushed people out, in March of 2020, it wasn't working. So, for us, it was an amazing process, because we started this pre-pandemic. We learned, it is truly important. Take that vote now. 73% probably would look low at that point. For us in Iowa, we got a new word to our vocabulary called a derecho, intense wind speeds, really. And that hit our eastern state, taking trees down by the masses, electrical poles, which we all know has aerial fiber connected to it. That right there was another learning piece for us to go, okay, now here's a decision, a fork in the road, aerial or underground. That one really motivated us to be smart and think about that, invest in underground for our system. So we've used multiple times throughout this project to learn what others are doing, to see what's going on, and to be agile and flexible, which is really not something a city's very good at. So in this project, we've kind of really stepping outside of our normal selves and become better, and we're getting there. It's crazy to say, and every time I do get the opportunity to speak about it, I finally get to say, this year we'll be turning customers on, and that's amazing comment for us. And
that's exciting.
Just puts a smile on all of our faces.
So I'd like to ask and I bet this applies more to, I'm not sure who it applies to. I know it applies to Angela, but did the presence of a public-owned utility in the community enhance the potential for community-owned broadband? And I'm getting, from listening to FX and Ryan, you didn't have a public utility like Angela does, did you?
For us in Fort Dodge and in Iowa in general, most municipal telecoms really go on the backbone of an municipal electric utility. We will be the biggest of recent years to do that without an electric utility.
Okay.
So many said that's a stop, turn around, don't go forward anymore. And we had great consultants that helped us navigate through that to realize, yeah, that would make it easier, but it's not a stoppage for it. And we're proving that. We really hope to make a blueprint that others can, in our situation, can utilize ours and just make that step easier and easier.
No, I think that's great. FX, did you guys have a utility? What happened? Hello?
No, and in fact, when we began, we began as a private organization owned by the towns. So the towns had a contract that said, we're going to govern this together. But then the first thing the board did was to set up an LLC, and then turned over to the LLC the responsibility of getting it all figured out. And because Vermont law said that municipalities could not use their taxing power to fund internet services in any way, or communication services, we never had the idea that we had the resource of the towns behind us. And so that's why when we were not able to get the big private investment we thought we would be able to get initially, it took us 7-8 years to figure out that we should get the state to allow us to make a district so that we could access the revenue bond market. And then we had to change some of the internal operations. So it was a real learning process. I mean, this this is a complete bootstrapping by a bunch of local volunteers by and large.
Interesting. And Angela, of course, you did have your utility, and did that help you set this up?
I think in our case, yes, it very much did. We are a utility district, but we only serve water and sewer. But our brethren on the east side of the state, so Grant County, Chelan County, Douglas County, they all have public utility districts that also operate the electric service. So they started this in 2000, and they had retail authority or wholesale authority to provide services from excess capacity fiber that they had put up for their SCADA systems. Because that was even brought to the forefront, because those entities changed the authorities, allowing PUDs to be able to provide telecommunications services, I believe that is the only reason why Kitsap PUD was approached to do this. When Kitsap County and when Kitsap PUD started this, in Kitsap County, we had 3 local incumbent telephone providers. And so a school district would have long distance to talk between a school district office and some of the satellite schools. And in some cases, they crossed multiple LATA boundaries. And so you would have compounding expenses for data transport as well. So building the fiber was really a result of PUDs starting this in Washington State and saying, we can provide this service for you. For the residential network, I believe that if we were driven to do this because people who worked at businesses where they had service from us wanted that at their house. And that started in 2015 when we started the survey to really gauge what the interest was people coming into our boardroom and saying, we need this at our homes.
Okay. And all of you have very different sized communities. Angela, I don't know the population of Kitsap County, but have you found, is there an ideal population size for the business case, or were smaller mid-tier communities more apt to support the business case? I know this is a little different for Ryan because he's sitting in sort of a mid-sized community. Right. For Angela and FX, how did you judge how many people you needed and what was the optimum for signing up there?
So one of the things that is a benefit in providing the public entity is, and I think FX mentioned this before, is being able to look at that long-term return on investment. And I think that's key here. We're unique again in that we had this backbone already built. And so we didn't have that expense moving forward. But I will tell you, once we get into connecting small communities to that backbone, we're looking at 60 home communities, things like that, or 120 home. We really stay right around that range to focus on putting together a utility district that serves that community. And I can go a little bit into how we're using utility districts.
Yes. Why don't you, do that.
So local utility districts, are a tool that we can use that allows the community to finance the construction of broadband to each home. And so with that, we're working with those individual communities. It's a very, very micro-focused, instead of looking at the whole of Kitsap County, which is about 100,000 residences. And especially when we look rural, so our focus is the rural unserved communities. When we look at those, if we can stay in the smaller areas, you get a very type of cost for each of those homes within it. We work with that community. A number of 60 is ideal. We've done 120. We're working on a 500 home one now, but really staying smaller, you're able to coordinate better within that community. and the costs associated with it are spread out amongst that group, and makes it much more cost effective. Once we form that LUD and build it out, they're then able to finance it and pay us back over the course of 20 years. It is guaranteed by a lien on their homes, and I think that is it's definitely a positive for us as Kitsap PUD, because we're able to work with local banks to finance it, and they consider that a very strong loan because it is guaranteed by the property for the individual property owners. But again, I would say when we're looking at how much it costs per homeowner, because we really have the homeowners pay for it themselves, right around 30 to 60, you're getting to be right around $8,000 per home. You go lower than that, and you usually need to have some grant subsidies.
And do you offer those, or are you getting that?
We are. So depending on the community itself, we've applied for multiple different grants, but we have been awarded 3, and one, it's about 700 homes between the 3 grants that we are connecting using funds from our Community Economic Revitalization Board. So one of the things about Kitsap County, we're not distressed, we're not rural. It's very challenging for us to be considered for a lot of the grant funding, but our Community Economic Revitalization Board at the state level is a more equal focus across the board. So you can look at areas that are more urban and fund broadband services with them. But we are making communities self-identify to us before we apply, just so you're aware.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions here, so let me just ask them before we move to our next panelist in answering this question. The first is, not sure if this question was asked, but will this be rolled out first to businesses rather than homeowners? And I think that goes to Ryan. Well, it goes to all 3 of you. Did you roll out to businesses before you did residential?
You know, for us in Fort Dodge, it's going to roll out really in the most effective and efficient way possible. We've seen in other municipal utilities around the state, when they did it, they did like if your neighborhood has the most people register in this period, and they'll be first. And we knew that was going to that would be a problem. That was going to cause a divide between haves and have-nots. And really, the theory is get the system to the people as quick as possible. And all that does, it probably spurs some people to do it, but I think it hurts more feelings afterwards and messes up what I call the math of it. You know, we're trying to get that fiber out there. We're trying to hook on, you know, it's not a all or nothing for us. As we build out, we'll turn customers on. So, you know, it's got to work its way out for us. Our CO will be in the basement of City Hall, and it kind of permeates out from there. And that's math. You know, how do we get that out there? And people understand that. You know, we can. This world of broadband can overtalk people too much. And really, when you can say, hey, here's what we're doing. We want it to get to you quick, but we're following the math to make sure it gets to everyone as quick as possible. They understand that, and they can respect that. That doesn't leave any bad feelings towards it and ideas like that.
How about you, FX?
Well, we learned a lot of hard lessons about building based on signups and things. But the direct answer to the question, residential or business, we are still focused on delivering residential service. We are still not in a position to give a business the kind of assurances and service level agreements that they would want to have. And fortunately, there are companies that have built a middle mile fiber that have a business of supporting businesses. So, you know, any medium-sized or semi-large business in Vermont that needs good high-speed internet fiber with a service level agreement, their vendors have been in place since around 2005 or so. We're not in competition with them. We are building out in areas where not even cable would have been built. Okay, and it's, you know, people get shocked when I run into friends here where I live, where we have plentiful cable, and a lot of them are from, you know, out of state and own second homes. And I say, all those towns to our west and our north, you know, they don't even have cable. And you see their jaws drop. But this is the reality in rural America, is that there are still to this day plenty of places where underserved, you know, literally means you've never seen a fast internet connection. Forget about it. I also want to say that, you know, our history is that we did virtually all of this with no government support or even encouragement. We literally did this on locally borrowed money for the first 5 or 6 years, and we were the aid that we got from the state was a law that let us become a municipality that could access the municipal revenue bond market. But even the state law doesn't allow us to get any property tax funding out of our member towns. So, and we've learned a lot of hard lessons. Believe me, if anybody's out there listening to this, you know, feel free to reach out, because I think we've learned most of the lessons that you can learn trying to do this. One of the things that we did was, yes, initially we were building on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis, and that has come back to bite us very hard as we've gone back to those towns to finish building out the rest of it, and discovered that we were doing it so much on a shoestring, the stuff wasn't well documented enough. And now, in order to figure out which fiber goes where, we've got to get somebody up on a pole and find out who complains when we unplug them. Okay. So, but, you know, hey, this is, you know, this is just a fact of life. This is you know, this is make do in northern New England. And I know that there's a lot of make do in Iowa, and I'm sure there's a lot of make do in Washington. Yeah. And, you know, we all have different things that are available to us. The thing that we had that was plentiful in Vermont was a real sense of community spirit, and a lot of really accomplished and enthusiastic people who are willing to devote hours and hours, and in fact years of time, to making this happen on a volunteer basis.
That's great. One other question that's come in is, did any of you consider wireless before you went to fiber, or did you do wire? Go ahead, Angela.
We do provide wireless. We did provide some wireless mesh networks in places where we had a lot of transient populations. So downtown historic districts, things like that, where people were coming to visit. We did provide a wireless mesh there, but we are very heavily treed, hilly, and rain. So all of those three things together make wireless so challenging. And even we are seeing even our rural communities that qualify for the Starlink service are having a hard time getting that connected up. So no, in that wireless to the home was not done in Kitsap County. Some of our other PUDs on the eastern side of the state, where there's less trees and more flat, have done that.
How about you, Ryan? Did you look at wireless at all?
We did. I think what we found was we better get a backbone of fiber in there first. to really provide that foundation and to make sure that we future-proof that way. And fiber is going to be there, and other technologies will build off of it. Like Angela said, we've got some topography and tree issues that that people are trying to deal with right now with some satellite services, point-to-point connections, and not everyone can. And it's just a difficult thing. One thing I'd add for us on that business versus residential of that, in Fort Dodge, we're all in the same boat, and it was sinking. So when businesses tell you they pay monthly for 3 internet service providers just so they have one working at any given moment, we can tell them whatever price because they're just happy that they're going to have one that works. To see those signs up, no credit cards right now because they have no internet is a common theme in Fort Dodge. So for us, we didn't look, it used to be fiber to the home was the term. And for us, it's fiber to the premise because it's just about a building and to getting it there. We understand that everyone needs it, and we're here for that community. FX point of that community spirit's what's really propelled this forward, to have everyone in support of it from all levels, from citizens to the businesses to the council. I mean, the banks that funded it for us, it's just been amazing on that. And it's a great project to be with because everyone's of support and happy with it and just want it.
Yeah.
So I have another question come in, which is, I don't know if this is a citizen of one of yours, but somebody is asking, what would the cost be for business for the fiber connection? And then why would I want to change from Frontier / Mediacom? Okay, confess, whose community is that?
I would say that's Fort Dodge. And someone that would want to change, I base all of ours off of our survey results. I'm not here to talk about another ISP. What we heard when we reached out, sounds like Angela did it, I'm sure FX did it, and you talk to your community and you let them give you the information.
Yeah.
So what we found was, first, none of the local providers are consistent. You could hear a great thing about one, intermixed with many other things that didn't show for it, or that they can provide that service in one neighborhood but not the next. It even got to the point of one neighbor likes it, one neighbor hates it. I mean, that's just outdated and troublesome infrastructure. Wasn't reinvested into the product, and people are showing for that. We weren't looking, the city of Fort Dodge wasn't looking to get into the broadband utility business. You talk about other utilities. Yeah, we have water, we have sewer, we have sanitation. Those are non-competitive fields. Those are what we deal with.
Exactly.
This is a new step for us to get to a competitive marketplace. But what we knew was it wasn't being provided.
Yeah.
Government wasn't looking to get bigger on this one. We had to get bigger on this one. It was a great opportunity that the private sector could have filled this need and chose not to. And we couldn't just sit back and wait for, we'll get to it again and again.
So I think one of the interesting things is I am guessing that the three of you come from very different political milieus, if you will, that I'm sure you're probably from a more conservative farming community, Ryan, and Angela, you're on Eastern Washington. We don't need Western Washington. We don't need to say more. FX, you're probably from a very independent part of the country. And so I think it's fascinating that all of your communities have come together to say this should be community provided because we're just not getting success from private enterprise, which is, I think, is very interesting.
If you fiber to the partisanship, give them slow internet, right? I think if you want to convince anyone of anything, give them slow internet and make them work on it. They'll definitely work together to push that. That's down the aisle type of idea right there. So yeah, we
Yes.
don't see that. There's not colors to it. There's not feelings to it. It's we're in this together. Let's get this better for us.
That's what I kept getting told by Patrick Leahy's staff and Peter Welch's staff and Bernie Sanders' staff, was that, you know, the money in the bill for broadband, everybody's on board. Don't worry about it.
And to follow up with you on Ryan, boy, you're getting a lot of questions. Your citizens must be listening today. Why is Fort Dodge doing this build and creating a service organization themselves instead of working to create a public-private partnership?
Well, we did. That's where we started. We started there really out of fear. You know, we don't know how to do this. And we did the RFP. We had multiple companies put in for it, either to do it all themselves, you know, just take it off of us and they do it themselves, or to work with us in some sort of partnership of, you know, of both 50-50. We pay for some, they do operations. And what it came down to, I talked a little about it before, was what happens when that company changes? You know, you're betting your future right now. We already know what it's like to be behind, and we were at a cusp. We had a big decision to make. Our elected leaders knew that what they were doing right then was going to be decades. I mean, this is a huge step, and we did vet it. We looked at it from every different angle, and that word control, and control gets negatively used a lot. You know, I don't want to be controlled, but control is, I control my own destiny. And that's where we came out of on this, that we needed to ensure, not for ourselves, really not even for our kids, but our kids' kids, of how do we make this better for Fort Dodge moving forward? You know, North Central Iowa, Northwest Iowa has a migration of its population going to the metro areas. This can be that impact that allows people to stay where they are and work from anywhere they want. I mean, we're hearing of people that are moving out of FX's area and Angela's area to come to Iowa.
Yeah.
They quit their job and they're living in rural Iowa because they love the simple life of it while they're still making their salary of the West or East Coast. I mean, we have something that not everyone has, and now we can market it and it can actually work for people. Or in many instances, we have industry in Fort Dodge, but maybe it's that trailing spouse that doesn't have the job, and now they don't have to relinquish their job. They can keep it, work from home, because of a top-notch, fast, reliable, cost-competitive system.
So oh, go ahead, FX.
Yeah, I just want to throw in on this that, you know, fiber to the premises creates a tremendous asset. It creates a tremendous asset for every premises, whether it's a residential premises or a business premises, to have that connection to fiber and have the ability to access that world-class broadband. That's a tremendous asset for the owner of that location. For the city to own the network, that is a tremendous asset for the city. And this business is a great slow money business. You're not going to make outsized profits on it, but it's very difficult to lose money, and it's certainly easy enough to make enough money to pay off the money you have to borrow to get it set up, and then you have some left over, right? EC Fiber is donating that to an organization that's going to help subsidize people who can't otherwise afford broadband, right?
Yep, I agree. So let's talk about some of the things that are going to come to the market to help us build more economically, help you all. So the first thing that is out there is the second tranche of ARPA is going to be released in May. And I would think most of you might be eligible directly for some of that. FX, are you dependent upon the state doling that out, or do you have communities that'll get their own allotment? And I would think that Fort Dodge would get its own allotment. And Angela, your county, no, you're dependent on the state. Oh, county's getting it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
because
are you all getting any of that money, and will it be used for broadband in your instance?
we received a $2.8 million grant out of ARPA funds in December that is funding the work to design the network in our 8 new towns. So all of the pole surveys, we also do premises surveys for every one of the premises in the towns to figure out how they're going to be hooked up, so that can be included. But the important point here is that in Vermont, as in most of New England, county governments basically do not exist in the way that they exist in the rest of the United States.
Right.
And there are no cities of much note in Vermont. Our largest city, Burlington, is like 50,000 people, and there's one other that has 20,000. So we don't have cities either, and therefore, under the federal rules, the money is going to come through the states, and in the state of Vermont, the legislature tackled this last year and relied heavily on the experience of EC Fiber and other CUDs. And the law that they came up with created something called the Vermont Community Broadband Fund, into which the ARPA money has been put. And then they set up a separate Vermont Community Broadband Board, which has hired staff, and they're coming up with rules for grant programs. And essentially right now, we have pre-construction grants. I just told you about EC Fiber winning one of those. And then there are construction grants, which are just beginning to be applied for now. So Vermont's a very interesting model, and I would encourage anybody listening to this who has some responsibility for thinking about how to get your state set up to work with all this money, both from ARPA and BEAD, to take a look at what Vermont is doing. It's a really good way, I think, of focusing on the statewide problem while at the same time really being able to engage people who are professionally knowledgeable and have an interest in seeing this done well.
And how about you, Angela? Are you guys getting?
We are. So we're working closely with the county and have a couple different projects. We did some Wi-Fi distribution in rural communities where right away with COVID, where there were students without access. So we pushed high-speed wireless sites to community centers out there. But the one we're working with right now with Kitsap County is funding distribution nodes in rural areas. So we talked about building 2 communities and then having to step back and redo that. FX mentioned the positives and negatives of coming back now and filling in the holes. We've done that. So now what we're doing is we're working with the county to place distribution centers in these more rural areas. So we then design for each of those distribution centers and build for each of those as they're coming forward. And that's actually quite a large grant. It's a $6.6 million grant, and that builds 30 of those distribution centers.
Wow. And what about you, Ryan? Is your city going to give up any of its ARPA money for the wireless for the fiber network?
You know, the city of Fort Dodge received $3.6 million in ARPA funds, and for us, we're still evaluating the best way to use this once in a lifetime funding source. You know, it's set up to help us in many fashions with our water and sewer that we have aging systems there that it could be used for, to increase outdoor recreation opportunities, which doesn't have a funding source of its own on everything. So, you know, we're really evaluating to make sure we're being prudent about how to use this. You know, for us, broadband, it does have a funding source of revenue loans for us. So we're really evaluating to make sure, hey, we're using it the right way and the best way at this time for all of our needs. I wish we could say ARPA was just enough to cover everything we needed, and magically it was all fixed, but it's not. So we definitely have a responsibility to make sure we use it the best way, and broadband's definitely in that discussion. It's one I bring up all the time, but you know, many people are at the trough trying to get fed on this one. So you're trying to get to the front of the line.
Well, after just having traveled 2,400 miles across this country, and every other hour I said to my daughter, why hasn't Mayor Pete looked at Interstate 40? It has some of the worst sections of the road I've ever been on. But speaking of enough funding for all the broadband you need, are you all working with your state broadband offices on how the BEAD money will be distributed? I mean, I would think that with $42 billion to be distributed through the state, that's going to meet a lot of needs, I would think.
Well, we're thinking that when the BEAD money comes in, it'll go into the broadband fund. We've done projections over the years, based on EC Fiber's experience and on where fiber is and isn't already in Vermont, that it's going to be somewhere between 450 and 600 million to get it done. We used to be firmer about the 450 million number, but now with the cost of materials and the cost of labor and everybody getting access to this, maybe not. But in Vermont, we think that there's certainly enough money to get all of the other CUDs off the ground and to the point where they can access the municipal revenue bond market. And so we've taken all that into account. One of the things I worry about is, we've borrowed 64 million of, maybe 80 million it's going to take to do. Maybe we can get the rest of it in grants, right? But, we're going to be like 80% funded with borrowing, and all the new CUDs are going to be 60% funded with grants, 40% with borrowing. So we're going to be the high-priced sore thumb, and that's going to be our, that's going to be the prize we get for being first.
Right.
Well,
I talked to my board about that too.
You're probably going to attract more residents faster because you have the fiber to offer them.
But we can't tax them.
You fortunately have been ahead of the curve in working with your state legislatures on a state broadband program. How's Iowa doing, Ryan? Are they starting to talk about how they're going to distribute that funds? They have to have a plan. They can't get the money if they don't have a plan.
For Iowa, I think one thing that maybe that we get caught on a little bit is getting everyone up to, right now when we talk about funding sources, is 25/3 access. And they haven't really positioned themselves to the 100/100. In my short time of learning about this, I think they undervalue the upload speed tremendously. And I think because it switches so quick, everything was always about, it's like muscle cars and horsepower, right? This download speed is where it's at. And I think in the last couple of years, what we found is content producers need to get their information up to the web, and it's not getting the respect that it really needs. So having, for us, we have symmetrical systems. So 100 megs down, 100 megs up, gig down, gig up. I mean, and we had to really explain that to people, because in Fort Dodge, you have the ability to get inconsistent, good download speeds. They're not there all the time, but you have them. But then it's just minuscule upload speeds. And if COVID taught us something, people wanted to get, that was their way to get out, and they wanted to put stuff up there. And with businesses going to more hybrid work environments, by people working from their home, choosing that, I mean, giving up salary and other benefits to work from home to have a better work-life balance, that upload speed has just magnified the importance of what it is. And I hope when they do funding, they know that, and that they're really listening to those that understand it, to make sure that funding gets to both sides of that, not just one.
I'd like to, Heather, if I can, kind of comment on what Ryan said. I think one of the things he said is building a symmetrical network, and I think that's why public broadband is needed, right? We've had the local incumbents get the funding for getting right up to what that next level is. So we've gotten funding to now say we can go up to 25.3. Next time it'll be up to 120. The publics are building it for the future. The publics are saying, let's put this in for the future. Much like Ryan, we're doing a symmetrical, we're doing, actually we're doing an active Ethernet network, which can be more expensive and more fiber intensive than a PON network. But again, it's for the future proofing. We don't want to have to go for this money again. We want to do it once, we want to put it out there, and we want to support our community for the long run.
Yeah. So I think that's, you know, I'm a old time fiber girl, as you all know, from my work at Fiber Broadband. And, you know, we used to say, build it once, build it right. So you don't have to have this continual reinvestment. I mean, that's been the tragedy of our universal service funding system, that we keep paying these people, like Angela said, to just build up to the next speed, but not to invest for the future. So we've paid for the same piece of regeneration, if you will, 3 or 4 times, and we're still not giving our communities what they need. But that's one of the exciting things about this, both the Treasury funding under ARPA and the BEAD money, is that their underlying message is, if you're not giving us 100 by 100, we want to know why, and it better be built to get there. You know, you have some temporary reason that you can't provide it, you better be building in how you're going to do it eventually. So I think that's a real benefit of the grant money that's coming in the system, because there will be a real incentive to put in those higher speeds that wasn't there before. You know, Angela brought up an interesting point, because they are an open access network, and that's why they use Active-E, because it allows them to accommodate a variety of ISPs. What made you go towards open access? And FX and Ryan, did you all consider that at all on your network?
Yeah, so what made us go towards it actually was the restrictions in our authorities that required us only to provide wholesale open access networks. So we, as PUDs, built these wholesale networks, and everything we did was a public-private partnership, right? Every service we turned up was with a regional service provider and driven by that end user and that service provider. As of 2018, Kitsap PUD could provide retail service. We went out to the legislation and asked for a authority to provide retail in the case that there was no quality service provider. And that really had to do with the fact that individuals were investing tens of thousands of dollars to bring fiber to their home, and we needed to make sure they would have a service provider in the future. What we found is that those service providers compete, and the more competition and the more choice we have, the better the services have been for our residents. So right now, Kitsap PUD, absolutely supportive of maintaining an open access wholesale network where we are not a service provider. However, we do have a service level agreement with all our ISPs to say, this is what you have to be providing. So we don't end up in the situation with up tos, and you end up saying, well, we'll give you up to 100 meg download and upload, but you're getting a meg, and those types of situations. So we are committed to open access. It's been a successful business model for us, and we'll continue down that path.
So Ryan and FX, did either one of you consider an open access model?
I guess, you know, if I go back and I look at our very earliest documents, that's talked about quite a bit, but, you know, there are no players who are interested in this market. You know, in these 30 odd towns, we maybe 60,000 population. And we're going to have to build 2,000 miles of network to get to them.
Yeah.
It's just,
I agree. There's a certain density that is needed to make open, not density. It's not density. There's a certain population served number that is needed to make open access viable. So, and I think we've all talked about that, especially, I think several of the people on this call, and probably you all have heard Kim McKinley say that's one of the reasons they have success in Utopia, because they have what did she say, Angela? 60,000 subscribers or something.
Yeah.
So I mean, she fully acknowledges that for open access, you need to have a certain amount. And I can see for FX, but what about you guys, Ryan? Did you think about an open access network?
Well, you know what? We started this to solve a problem. You know, we had a problem, and there's a lot of challenges we have in Fort Dodge with that. But when we looked at the open access concept, you know, I'm not sure if it was going to solve all the problems that we had. I think we probably lean more towards FX's situation there. And although we support it, we understand it, you know, this was the best means to protect the future of Fort Dodge, our investment, and really provide what was needed for Fort Dodge at that time. I think you got to look really case by case to make sure you're doing it right. And I think what a dynamic we have in this of what we're looking at from across the nation, of how it can be great and how it probably won't work in others. So, I mean,
and you're right. And I think there is no one model for every community. And I think that's, even though one thing I believe is that if you have to go public broadband, it should be available and easily accessible by the community. But it isn't going to be right for everybody. And we have heard some real leaders in the field talked about why it wasn't right for them, and then others who say it was right. So I think that's the good news about what's going on in the market right now, is that we have a lot of different options being presented, and we have a lot of experts like yourselves who are able to talk about it. But we are past time. We're running out of time. So, and there's Joe. And Joe's going to wrap up, but I just wanted to say thank you to all my panelists. This has been a great discussion. And I am announcing that this is my last Zero Touch webinar. I have been doing them. I just wanted to thank ETI for the wonderful opportunity. They were prescient enough to call me in March of 2019, before anything was even locked down, and said, we think we're going to all virtual learning. And so we've done 24 webinars. I mean, we've done a slew, over 20 of these webinars on different topics. But as of next week, I am going to Mears Group as their VP of External Affairs. So I'm starting another chapter of my life. So, but I did want to tell you,
Sorry about that. Sorry, Heather. But I just want to first thank the panelists. You guys, it was phenomenal just listening to all your stories. It's always, exciting when the conversation is just so free flowing, and when one of the panelists speaks and the other ones are not in their heads because they've either experienced that sort of situation, or they understand or empathize with them. So, thank you so much to the panelists. Just as some quick housekeeping, that this recording will be made available to all the viewers as well as the participants. It's also going to be available on our website, broadbandbunch.com. And just, Heather, just as a final wrap up, on behalf of everyone, we can't thank you enough. Your guidance and your expertise is without peer. It was an absolute pleasure to work with you. It was one of those things where when we would use your name, it was like the doors would magically open up and people would want to be part of this series.
They'd be slammed in your face.
Right. But no, you truly are the gold standard. So thank you so very much for everything that you've done for the Broadband Bunch. Thank you so very much.
And I'm not, as you can tell, I'm staying in the business. Ryan looks puzzled. I know I'm going from sort of the soft side to the actual real we build it side. So that'll be very interesting, but I'm going to work for somebody I've known a long time and really enjoy working with. So I will be around. I will be at Broadband Communities for all of you who are there, and I'll be on the road with the Mears show. So I expect to run into a lot of you at different industry events.
All right, well then that's going to wrap up this session. Until next time, thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.